Hi, everybody, and welcome. We are talking today with Emily Sheskin, who is the director of one of the more powerful films that I have seen in a while called JessZilla. And it is the story of Jessalyn Silva when we meet her. She's roughly 8 years old, and she is sort of getting into this burgeoning love of boxing, which she has discovered through a really kind of extraordinary relationship she has with her dad. And Emily, welcome. It is an amazing film. I'm really really happy to have it on the Realist. And I guess curious about how you met Jess and sort of found this story.
Yeah, we started as a short film called Girl Boxer, which was a New York Times op doc, and you're welcome to check that out. I call it like the 6 minute preview of what you're going to meet the Silvas and the feature is about, which is essentially about them and their relationship. And when I met her, I was interested in following a woman that was in a combat sport, and I happened to see this local New Jersey girl being held up with a belt, and I just felt like I had to learn more about her and her family. And so after a couple months of chatting, we made the short, and then once it was on OpDocs, it was pretty successful. And I had said to Jesselyn, because at that point I really loved them and I believed that she was going to go to the Olympics, so I was sort of like, how do you feel about telling a story where we see if you go to the Olympics? And she was kind of like, when I go to the Olympics, sure. And I was like,
Hmm.
perfect. So that is where the project started. And then when you watch the film, you'll see that she grows up next to her dad because we followed her for years. And so, yeah, every year, it was a question of, at the core, it's really a father daughter story. And I was curious to see as she got older if it would change her relationship with him, if it would change her relationship with boxing. And I think you'll see in the film, if anything, their relationship grows deeper and her love of boxing also grows deeper.
Yeah, yeah, no, and it's completely engrossing. She's an amazing personality. The When you did the short, did you? How was that experience? I guess making for people who don't necessarily know that they know the time length difference between a short and a feature, but when you're creating it, did you think you might be finished when it was a short, or did you think that I really want this to be a feature? Did you know that all along?
At first, I mean, I went into it to make a good short. I think the biggest thing for me was I hadn't expected to do something involving a child. So for me, it brought up sort of more questions of how to approach such a film. And for me, I've watched a lot of documentaries where there are children, and a lot of times the parents aren't featured very heavily. And for me, I've thought, I want to know who the parent is with the child. Like, that relationship was really interesting to me. So I always wanted Pedro with Jesselyn, because when I first met them in the gym, they were inseparable. Like, they go everywhere together. They were always a duo. So it seemed strange. Why would I just film with Jesselyn? Pedro is such a huge part of her story. And so I think it started there. And Pedro, I was hesitant to do something on potentially a helicopter parent. And so I loved how, in some ways, like, frightened he was in a very normal way, with a daughter who loves a combat sport, and how quickly Jess was sort of in the driver's seat, and this man was really trying to figure out that line between parenting and also being supportive, saying no, but wanting to encourage this passion. And so I thought that was great from the second I met them. And then we talked about what it would mean to make a short. And just the more I got to know them, the more I liked them. And I think in some ways, when we started to talk about a feature, it was kind of so I could just keep hanging out with them because I liked them so much. So yeah, I didn't think it was going to be a feature at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, as a parent of three kids who went through the youth sports thing, and some of the kids were very good at what they did. I recognized that immediately. It was like that line of, we want to give you all the opportunity we can without overdoing it,
Yes.
without becoming that parent. And it's hard. It's really hard to know where the line, because you're passionate about what your kid's doing and you want them to
Hmm.
be successful, but on their terms. Um,
Absolutely.
so when you can you talk about how a story, I guess when you're telling a story that is over time, right? You don't quite know where a film is going to end when you're doing it that way. What are some of the challenges when you shoot for a year, 2 years? You know, you just kind of keep coming back, and you know, how as a director do you approach that?
Well, I was really inspired by the Up series, so I think that was kind of where I was starting. Like, what would it look like to make a film about an athlete and then use that sort of Up series mentality where you're returning to these people's lives and you're kind of asking the same series of questions to see what's changed and what's stayed the same. So I think no matter what, we always grounded every year in an interview, which is side by side, which you'll see in the film, and then depending on what was going on that year, we would have shoots accordingly. I think the real challenges came from, as a filmmaker, you tell people, oh, I'm going to follow this person to the Olympics, and they say, it sounds amazing. Like, get back to us when you do. So, trying to sustain it, I think, is in some ways the most difficult part of a project like this. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a bit of both an improvisational dance where you're keeping the door open and understanding that things are going to happen that are completely unexpected and out of your control, while also saying, these are the questions we ask every year, and then let's figure out how we build on that. So there's this mix of kind of consistency and improv.
In the first few years, what surprised you as you kind of kept coming back?
The thing that surprised me most as a woman who experienced adolescence was just how steadfast Jess was. She never faltered. Like, I always wondered, was there going to be a moment where like she liked a boy in her class and boxing made her scary to him, and would that change? And no, it was never like that. Boxing was always first. School was first, boxing was second, and then family third, and then friends and like the like. And she just was very focused and driven in a way that I think many adults are not. And so that truly surprised me, because I think it's one thing to really love something when you're a kid, but to sustain that love, especially when it gets more serious and especially when the training gets harder and more severe, she never lost that love. It never faltered. Like, that was in some ways the most surprising thing to me. I had said that, if we don't make a more classic sports documentary where she goes to the Olympics, we would make something that's similar to like a Boyhood, except I said if the boy was more interesting. Uh, and so, like, that was sort of my plan B. And in some ways, I thought that that was a more realistic movie to make, where you're following someone through adolescence, but really we got the boxing story more than anything in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, she was amazing to watch in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Just always on point about it, and you know, how did the boxing community? You talked about a girl in a combat sport. Uh, how did the boxing community um, embrace or not Jess, and
Oh yeah.
simultaneously a filmmaker following along?
So I can't say it. I mean, I think people have preconceived notions about like any sort of community. Boxing would definitely be one of them. A lot of the men at these tournaments were dads, but like on the surface, kind of like Pedro, they would seem really tough. And then you would kind of have a moment where you're like, they're dads, like they're really good dads. And we joked that like an alt title to our film would be good dads, because like we met just so many wonderful fathers, and we highlight some of them: Coach Raj, Oscar. They're all really active in their kids lives and their training, and they're all really good dads. And I think that it surprised me how good the dads were in this like boxing community. And then Jess is such a lovable person. I mean, I think it was hard for her. She would have a fight, win or lose, walk away friends with the opponent. And that was kind of always how it was. There's this mutual respect. There was an excitement to be there. And so she had so many friends in the boxing world and community. So when we got to this part of the film too, I mean, we get letters. There's a huge demand for people to see it, like from that community. And I think that, like, again, her story is really inspiring because it's a really relatable story to a lot of these young athletes. And I think you don't have to be a kid who does boxing. If you are a parent and your kid does a sport, or you are a teenager and you do a sport, you will see yourself in this story.
Yes, 100% agree. And you talked about earlier that you sort of, it was a joke, but you enjoyed spending time with them, and that was a little bit of the impetus of like, how can I make a feature? Um, I've experienced that myself in films that I've done. Um, how was that, as the story progressed, and how much importance did the trust that you had built up with the Silvas wind up mattering?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've actually started to write a Substack about the lessons from this film, and that build of trust is one of them. And with the feature, we always did this thing. Every year, I would check in with Jesslyn and Pedro, no cameras, just to say, do you still want to be part of this? Do you still want to make this? Which, as a filmmaker, is a risky move because the person can then say no. And then all the time you've spent, you're going to have to figure something out. But knowing that Jess was a kid, it was really important for me that she be active in the making of this, that this is partially her choice, that she has agency, and she doesn't want to be part of it. She isn't forced to be part of it. And I think giving people that agency and that choice is really important in building trust. From the very beginning, before we ever hit record, we had, I think, 2 months of conversations about what does it look like to make a documentary? What can happen, the good and the bad? Can you handle that as a parent? And can you have these conversations with Jesslyn so she may understand? Like, we worked as hard as we could to do that. So before we even stepped onto set, there was this realization that, like, I think Pedro was sort of like, Emily is a worrywart, but it's good that she cares about us. And so that trust was there. And then later on, you'll see in the film that Jess gets a diagnosis. And to be honest, I wasn't thinking about the film. Her dad wasn't thinking about the film. And Pedro said, Jess is asking me when we're going to film again. And what do I say? And one of the things that we talked about was how we were part of her normal in a lot of ways. And he didn't want to take that away from her just because she had gotten this diagnosis. And so my feeling was we should do what we always do, which is see what she's thinking and feeling, see why she wants to be part of it or if she doesn't. And kind of establish a new ground rule of like, well, what are we doing? What are we making? And I'll never forget that conversation because, you know, I think her dad and I were in a very different place. And I said to her, this film was originally going to be about you going to the Olympics. And I don't know how realistic that story is anymore. Why do you want to keep filming? And she said, I want to show people that they can be brave in the face of scary things. And that is our third act. And so I think that, like, all of that built trust. And when we stepped onto set after she had gotten this diagnosis, we knew that that is the heart of what we're now making. That boxing has informed how they show up for this new fight.
Yep, absolutely. And that moment, I think it was a brilliant choice as a director, and by Jess, to
Mm-hmm.
sort of incorporate all that she had learned,
Yeah.
and direct it in a new way. And it was, I that that interview, right as the third act begins, really, um, that's the thing that stuck with me, for days
Mm-hmm.
after I watched this film. It was, just, the audience will appreciate so many things in their children's lives, and in their own lives, because of the story that Jesselyn, uh, embodies, and it's really amazing. When from a from a point of view of a film, you've got something amazing, and yet I assume when you start to think through the next steps of a film, which is distribution and how people will react to this. Yeah, did it make the film tougher to distribute?
Yes.
Can you
I
talk
think
about
the answer is yes. It's interesting because I think our film, I would say that it's emotional, but in many ways, it's not sad in a way you think it would be because Jesselyn is such an incredible person. She is so brave. And I think that her spirit, her literal fighting spirit is the best of us, like as people. And the way she handled herself with such grace and love and all of these things, I think, yes, people are going to wrestle with what happens to her and her diagnosis. And it is sad that it happens, but I also think that we've gotten countless letters about how inspiring the film is and like how Jesselyn has made people braver in their own lives because of her attitude that she has and the way she takes on and thinks about challenges, whether it was boxing or facing this diagnosis. And so while I think it's been difficult from a distribution standpoint, I think that often important stories probably are, and so we don't want to be just like afraid of that. We're not going to be like, oh, well, we shouldn't make this because like people might not distribute it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it's too special. She's too special, and so much good has come from sort of our impact arm, which I think is an important note. We've raised over $50,000 for kids with the type of brain cancer that Jess had. And so, this is like actively contributing to finding a cure in a meaningful way. And that to me has been the most special part of all of this.
Yeah, no, that's incredible, and that's awesome to hear. And I hope we're able to up that number over the course of its time on the Realist. And the I want to go back to what you were talking though about, like it's an important film. Like, why wouldn't you make this film just because it might be harder to distribute? Uh, it's one of the things that we're trying to address with the Realist is to sort
Mm-hmm.
of say, look, there are these unbelievable stories you should not miss, and yet because the large streamers will only kind of go for the most simplistic marketing vehicles, um, you just don't know they're out there. Can you talk about what it's like to be an independent filmmaker and want to chase stories like this that obviously truly matter? Um, and yet there's a system that's sort of built up to not support that, unfortunately, and how we might all work together to make it a little better.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're really appreciative to be on the Realist. I think this is a great first step, and what you're doing is really important. I think, Ben, who's my producer, and we've been talking a lot about collaborating with other filmmakers, figuring out films that have similar messages or similar themes, and kind of figuring out how we can put a spotlight on these films that people may have not heard of. Because the fact of the matter is, there's so many great documentaries and films that you've never heard of that I go to film festivals and I get the privilege of watching. And then I am looking for them to send them to a friend, and it is genuinely really challenging to find them, and that is frustrating. And so I think the biggest thing is support your local film festivals, check them out, go. I think too, demand stuff from streamers. Be like, I'm canceling my Netflix because I've watched like 5 docuseries that are exactly the same and not very good. And I saw this thing at a film festival, and where's that? I think that there's, it kind of goes hand in hand. We need people to show up and watch the movies and realize that these stories are important. And we also need the big companies to hopefully step up. And if they don't, I kind of feel like it becomes in some ways like when I was in college, documentary was in the art house. And it feels like we're kind of headed back to the art house. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because I would rather be showing these stories to people who are excited and passionate about them than trying to force this into a place where it doesn't fit. So I think it's kind of this like, can art and capitalism coexist? But hopefully we can find a nice middle ground because I think, with our film and so many other films I've seen, to be honest, they have large commercial appeal. And so it's surprising to me that it has been such an uphill battle for so many of us.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think we're going to find with Realist that there's a a community, and a pretty large community, that is craving these authentic, well told stories, and meeting people like Jess, who they would never have encountered before, and being inspired by them. I want to ask you, one of the other groups that's trying to help solve some of the problems you were just talking about is the popcorn list. What what was your the film was on the popcorn list? What was your experience, and how did it help?
It really helped. I mean, we were on the first ever popcorn list, which was really cool. We got to speak at Gotham Film Week as a result with the popcorn list. And ultimately, we do have distribution, and it's how our distributors found us, which was really meaningful for us. We may not have gotten, this huge deal with a Netflix, but we still got distribution. And we were working with the folks at Monkey Wrench Films, who are great guys, and they have really, really helped us get the film out there. And so, had we not been on the popcorn list, we would not have had the chance to probably meet them. And so, yeah, I think what they're doing is really important. I think they're really contributing to building a larger community of filmmakers, where I think we're all willing to help each other and share what we've learned, because the feedback that I've heard is, even if you do get sort of the dream deal, a lot of getting your film out there still really does fall on you. So I think we're all in a place of, how do we market our own film? How do we do as much as we can with it, so it can have as big of an impact as we would like it to have?
Yeah. Um, when you talk about the film to let people know why they should watch it, what's the key message that you like to leave people with?
The film started about, what does it mean to be a champion? That was the question we were asking. Like, what does it mean to be a champion? What does it take to be a champion? And I think that Jess's spirit embodies that fully. And so I think, for me, it's a father daughter story that speaks about facing every challenge head on. And I think that that's inspiring to watch, because everybody in life goes through something, as Jess says, and it's about how you approach that challenge, because life is like the journey, to be cheesy, but it is about how you handle those moments. And like Jess's attitude, her mindset, I mean, these are things that I learned from a 15-year-old girl that I'm going to carry with me through the rest of my life. And I think everybody should watch this and take that into.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I watched it as a dad, right? So I'm watching Pedro deal with
Mm-hmm.
this, and I think he revealed himself as a champion. Uh,
Absolutely.
so
When I would talk to the kids at, because we took this to many film festivals and we worked with education programs, and I always asked them if they'd seen Finding Nemo, and they all laughed. But I said that our film, in some ways, was inspired by what Finding Nemo did. If you're a kid, you think it's Jess's movie, and if you're a parent, you think it's Pedro's movie, similar to Finding Nemo.
you go. I love that.
Mhm.
And with that, I think really, really appreciate you having the film with us on the Realist. Can't wait to have people watch this, and we'll talk again soon for the live Q&A.
Sounds good.